What up, Coordination? How you doing? On the pod today, we have Alan Ransil, who is the director of Filecoin Green. You know about Filecoin, the cryptocurrency that allows you to track and pin IPFS data, a global file storage network. But did you know that Filecoin is very focused on becoming green carbon neutral, using the same tracking technology that it uses to create the positive externality of more file storage on the internet? Filecoin Green is using that same technology to make sure that it tracks its carbon output and offsets that carbon output. So we kind of pull the thread of carbon neutrality and blockchains in this episode. We talk about what Web3 can do for sustainability that Web2 can't, building a global carbon ledger, and then creating a Schelling point for the refi movement with the Sustainable Blockchain Summit and just the growth of the refi movement in general. So I think this is a fun episode, and it's well timed given that the merge in Ethereum is coming up. 99.95% less carbon usage of the Ethereum network coming up in the next month or so. And I think that the sustainability of the energy usage of blockchain networks is a big topic right now. And Filecoin has been putting in the work over the last several years in order to build Filecoin Green to make their network carbon positive and to be good for the world. So great episode. I hope you enjoy. Without further ado, I give you Alan from Filecoin Green.
Immutable X is the layer 2 platform for crypto gaming. Immutable offers massive scalability with up to 9,000 transactions per second and instant transaction confirmation. No more gas fees, no more waiting around for your transaction to clear. Immutable's zero knowledge rollup finally unlocks the world of crypto gaming. Immutable X is the only gas-free NFT minting platform with over 26 million NFTs minted, all with zero gas fees. With the power of Immutable, gaming developers don't also need to become smart contract developers. They just need to plug in to Immutable's API and instantly start unlocking the full potential of crypto assets inside of games. This is why world-class companies and projects have decided to deploy on Immutable X, like GameStop, Ember Sword, Planet Quest, Illuvium, TikTok, and many more behind the scenes. So start building your game on Immutable X today at immutable.com. Refi summer has arrived, and CELO is here for it. CELO is the layer 1 blockchain for the regenerative finance movement. It's fast, planet positive, and built for the real world. CELO has committed towards producing a sustainable future from the very beginning, and is the world's first carbon negative, EVM compatible layer 1 blockchain. CELO has become much more than a technology, a currency, a community, or even just a layer 1. CELO is a movement to create conditions of prosperity for everyone. You can soon engage with all of this via green asset Uniswap pools on CELO, benefiting reforestation and other regenerative products through the Toucan protocol, Moss, and more. Refi is also about the health of communities, and Resource Network is creating Bankless infrastructure for circular trade and mutual credit networks to benefit small businesses and local economies, all on CELO. Follow along on Twitter to learn more about how CELO is accelerating Refi Summer for a positive impact on people, communities, and the planet. If you're attending ECC, visit the CELO Saloon to learn about what's happening on the front lines of refi from industry experts.
Hey, Alan, how's it going?
Really good. How are you?
Pretty good. Thanks for joining the pod. Can you tell us about Filecoin and Filecoin Green?
Yeah. So Filecoin is the storage layer of Web3. IPFS, right, is a content delivery layer. So IPFS gets your data where it needs to be, when it needs to be there, and make sure it's content addressed. Whereas Filecoin is for long-term storage, right? So Filecoin launched in 2020. The utility token Filecoin allows you to pay storage providers to store your data and then prove that they are continuing to store that data over time. And so Filecoin Green is our initiative, which I started to try to understand the environmental impacts of the Filecoin network and do what we can to verifiably drive them below zero. So, in 2020, Filecoin launched. It was growing really, really quickly. I think we're now close to something like 1% of all of the data stored in data centers across the world is stored on Filecoin. Something like 1/11th the size of AWS. So it's a huge network. It's been growing really quickly, and people started asking right after it launched, what are the environmental impacts? How much energy does Filecoin use? And what do we know about that, right? And so we can get into more about how Filecoin Green works, but what we do is we go from on-chain proofs of data storage to estimates about electricity use of individual Filecoin storage providers, and then use those estimates to connect the network to renewable energy and do that in a verifiable way. And then on top of that, we're developing a whole tool stack in order to allow people to take a similar level of granularity and verifiability for the environmental impacts of other systems and really work to make all of Web3 and ultimately the entire economy beyond Web3 more verifiably sustainable than it is now.
Beautiful. Well, I just want to say, as a developer myself, I've used IPFS for many of the things that I've built. In fact, I think the first smart contract I ever built, I put a JSON blob directly on chain, and I had someone review the code. And they're like, no, don't do that. Put it on IPFS and put a hash of that in there. So, major respect for IPFS as a project, and I think it's really impressive that Filecoin Green exists and that y'all are taking the initiative to make the network carbon neutral. I'm actually looking at filecoin.energy, which is a site that shows the stats of the Filecoin energy or network energy usage. And I think that it's such an ambitious goal, but I'm just impressed because the cynic is me just expects that projects are going to externalize the costs of the carbon that they're creating. So what was it that made y'all go down the Filecoin Green route? Why not externalize the cost of the energy cost of the network? Is there a competitive advantage? Was it like a moral thing? Tell me about how that came about.
Right. I mean, so Juan and I have been sort of jamming on environmental issues since, I don't know, 2008.
So Juan Benet, the founder of Protocol Labs.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So sustainability has always been something that both he and I have cared about a lot. I think Juan always wanted Filecoin to be a network that provides a positive externality whenever people use it. So that was the entire concept behind Filecoin, and then IPFS as a lead up to Filecoin originally was, okay, Bitcoin has a lot of great things about it, but it creates these negative externalities that, especially in 2014, when Juan was initially thinking about this, were external, right? So Bitcoin was not endogenizing the environmental costs of mining and electricity use into the network. And so the question then becomes, and the question that I think Juan used to frame a lot of the basic concept from Filecoin from the very beginning was, how can you create a crypto network that produces positive externalities or beneficial externalities when people use it beyond just its value as a currency? And the conclusion he came up with was that it should be possible to develop crypto primitives that allow you to provide tremendous amounts of data storage, right, as a result of mining on that network. And so that was always the goal, right? And so with that framing, I think it's not too much of a leap to say, okay, we're creating this one type of externality, which is file storage, or the file storage network. What can we do to expand the scope of the externalities that we are measuring that the network is creating, and then do what we can to take all of those externalities and drive them verifiably in a positive direction? So I think that was sort of always the philosophy behind Filecoin. And then what we started to realize after as the network was being developed, and then when we really started to think about this problem as the network was growing, was that the design of Filecoin lends itself very well to this type of analysis. So when you store data on Filecoin, you don't store it on the network as a whole as sort of an emergent property. You store it with an individual Filecoin storage provider or a set of Filecoin storage providers for redundancy. And so what that means is that you have a contract to store this data with this given SP, storage provider, and we can see storage provider by storage provider, or like node by node, exactly how much data they're onboarding onto the network and how much data they're storing over time. What that means is that we have this ability to, in this really granular way, right? It's not that you have all of these nodes and they're mining on the network and you only see them when they like win a block reward, or you only see them when they make a transaction, but we actually see all of the activity of all of the active nodes all the time, right? Or at least every day when they like publish these proofs. And so that lends itself to this really sort of granular level of analysis that you were seeing, that you're seeing on Filecoin.energy, which is the dashboard that we built with our energy use model, which allows us to then take individual storage deals, so like data that you're storing corresponding to some NFT that you have, say, and map that to a set of storage providers, and assess what we can about where those storage providers are located geographically and how much energy they're using, and then go the next step, which is allow them to buy renewable energy in order to cover their energy use, right? And so you're able to like make all those leaps, right? Because of the design of the Filecoin network, where you can see the activity of every miner or every node. You're able to go from data to storage provider to energy use to renewable energy purchased, not just in aggregate or in general, but renewable energy purchased from a specific solar farm or a specific wind farm that's being used to store my data. And so that's sort of the level of transparency that we're aiming for, and the level of granularity that we're aiming for. And we really think that, right, the way we work with data across Web3 really lends itself to that, because we have all these primitives allowing us to verify, we're all part of this massive set of distributed systems, and we always have been, we're just sort of aware of it now, right? And we have these primitives allowing us to construct this like granular and verifiable view into the effects of our actions, right? Not just the direct effects, but the sort of extended effects and the externalities that you were talking about. And so we really think that, when we're doing things in Web3, we should just be able to print a receipt at the end of the day saying, this is what you did. These were the environmental effects of what you did. Here's how you could reduce them, and here's what people did to mitigate them.
Yeah, it's really interesting because you expect blockchains to be this transparent, immutable ledger that tracks financial transactions, but then taking that from a leap to tracking any externality is sort of, I think, a really powerful thing. And my expectation was that Filecoin, from the outside, a naive viewer might expect that Filecoin's really good at tracking storage on IPFS and pinned on IPFS, but the fact that you can generalize that externality of creating file storage into creating positive carbon impact and then track that is, I think that's a leap in generalizability that's really exciting to me. And so I guess if we take a broader perspective, what can we do in Web3 for sustainability that we can't with Web2? What further could be unlocked here?
Yeah, totally. Well, and I think the way you put that is really interesting, right? Because you would expect Filecoin to do a good job tracking data storage, but
Yeah.
like data is used to track data, right? So if you're good at data, you can use the data to track the data. But if you're good at data, you can also use the data to track the other things, right? And so it's like those basic primitives, right? It's you were talking about recursion when we were talking a week ago, right?
That's
and
right.
like the level at which you can take these systems and use them, like turn them on themselves, right?
Yeah.
And it's like I think that's super super powerful, right? And we're sort of in working with distributed systems the way that we do in Web3. We have this phase change where we're like really able to, because of that recursion combined with verifiability, right? Building verifiability into the basic primitives of the internet, right? We're able to work with data to track whatever we want in a way that is like far more granular and verifiable than we could otherwise. And so coming to your question, right, about what can we do in the sustainability space, really with Web3 tools that we can't do with Web2 tools, I think there's a huge opportunity to build systems to track all sorts of environmental externalities in a way that is far better and far more automatic than we can otherwise. And so a way to think about this is that right now, when we get a lot of our sustainability data from corporate reports on things like emissions. And those corporate reports are put together by auditors. And these auditors have to go through all of the financial records of a company. They have to cross-reference all these different data sets. They have to check with that company's suppliers. They have to do all of these different things manually that go into publishing this ultimate report of how much carbon emissions that company is responsible for, right? So as a result of the fact that all of this has to be done automatically, these auditors take a long time to first build that model and then go through assurances and then publish that report. And so you only have these reports published every year, right? And if you think about that, and you think about the economy as, at least in part, an information processing system, where we process information through price signals, but there's this extra level of information that we're now trying to add on top of all of these companies, allowing us to see, okay, if company A makes widgets and those widgets have a certain carbon intensity, and company B uses those widgets, then that carbon intensity has to be factored into company B, right? So this like information about emissions is being passed from company to company throughout this supply chain. And if every single company takes a year to do that, then every time like price information gets passed quickly, right? But this extra layer of information that we're putting on top of the economy, if every time a company reports that takes a year, and then their customers don't get that data for months after that data is current, right? And then they take a year to report. So every hop throughout the supply chain takes another year. And you think about the velocity with which that information is traveling through the economy, that's going to be very, very slow. And what that means is that if company A really far upstream changes something, by the time it gets to company C or D or E or F, it's going to be there's going to be a lag of many years, right? And so if we trust the climate scientists, which we should, because the IPCC has something like 10,000 scientists performing the sort of best verified science that has ever been done in the history of human civilization. The IPCC is saying that we have 8 years to decarbonize the global economy by 40%. And so if we are processing the information that is central to doing that, such that there's a time lag of 1 year when that information goes from company A to company B to company C, every step in that value chain, that's a problem, right? So we're just like fundamentally not working with a system that is going to enable us to pass information at the velocity needed in order to accomplish our goals. And so what we can do with Web3, right, is make that automatic, but you can only make that automatic because of the verifiability that you can get from doing things like content addressing your data, making sure that data is self-sovereign. So when someone changes something, you actually know who changed it. Making the pieces that can be publicly verifiable, things like what we're doing with Filecoin.energy, allowing you to go from on-chain proofs to energy use estimates, and also connecting that with renewable energy certificates that are publicly available. And I think zero knowledge has a huge part to play in building this whole system. But we can't build that global carbon ledger unless we use Web3 tools, because the way they're doing it now, they're just taking Excel spreadsheets and they're sending them from person to person at a company. And that's the system we have now, which takes a year to pass information from company A to company B. And that's just fundamentally not going to cut it when you think about the timescales we need.
Right. So it seems like it's a credibly neutral way to track the externalities, positive or negative, for carbon across the world that kind of disintermediates and is more efficient. And yeah, I mean, is that like a good summary of what you just said?
Yeah, and I think the credible neutrality is really important. And then I think also just at a fundamental information processing level, we need to design a system that puts us in a regime where our goals are possible. And the system as it is architected right now is just not in that regime.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know, it's interesting because I think the layman view is that blockchains are bad for the climate because of proof of work. But it's interesting to think about this credibly neutral ledger being secured with something like proof of stake, which uses 99.95% less energy than proof of work. And, you know, from there, not only can you have almost a carbon neutral blockchain based system, but you could even create externalities that make it carbon negative from there. So I think that those two insights together is what really gets me excited.
Yeah, totally. I think that we need to take all of the large systems in the global economy and make them more efficient. And so we should do what we can do to make Web3 systems less energy intensive. But the main effect of Web3 on the climate crisis and the main job we have to do is providing tools that are going to allow us to do global carbon accounting in a fundamentally more efficient way. Right. Like that. If you think about like the impact of Web3 on the planet, we need to reduce our direct impact, but that secondary impact of allowing us to actually understand across the economy, no matter where you are in a value chain, what can I do to reduce my emissions and what can I do to report that in a way where all of my actions are verifiable. Like that's going to be our main effect.
Right. Okay. So, I mean, oh man, I believe that Web3 can be used for coordination, and I believe that climate change is the largest coordination failure out there. but it is quite a daunting task to think that decarbonizing the entire global economy by, what did you say, 8 years from now? That's
Yeah,
quite a daunting
40%.
task. Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do we do that?
Yeah. It's a good question. I don't think
Yeah.
any one person has all the answers, right? And I
Hmm.
certainly don't. I think
Yeah.
we need to, I mean, everyone needs to do whatever they can, right? It's definitely an all hands on deck situation. And a big piece of that is understanding how to make this type of reporting verifiable, right? I think a big piece of it is also building on top of that. So once we're able, so Filecoin Green as an example, the first thing we did was we just built the models in order to allow you to go from proofs on the Filecoin chain to energy use estimates. And that's what first comes up when you go to filecoin.energy. Then after that, once you have the ability to understand what your impacts are, you then develop the ability to connect that to renewable energy. And so, that's this next piece where Filecoin storage providers can purchase renewable energy and prove that by making the certificates publicly available. And there's analogs to this in the carbon offset space. And then the third level is then building the right incentive structures in order to scale that and in order to get people to actually use those tools in order to reduce their emissions, right? And we need to build that. We're building that in Filecoin, right? We need to build that in the rest of Web3, and a lot of awesome people are working on that. And then we need to build the best tools for both doing carbon accounting and building those incentive structures. We need to build the best tools in the world for doing that in Web3 so that they can catalyze the global economy for people who are building larger incentive structures in order to see how can I actually do this better by using the tools that we developed to coordinate people better. And part of that's going to be private sector actors coming in. Part of that's going to be governments. I don't really care who does it. I just want it to be done, and I want to build the tools that are going to allow whoever is going to do it well.
So, I mean, building a global carbon ledger, is that what we're sort of talking about here?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think that, as someone who's worked on smart contracts and has played with these tools before, I can definitely see why a global carbon ledger is necessary, but I have a hard time thinking it's sufficient. So we basically not only need to have carbon credits on chain that people can purchase, but there has to be sufficient buy pressure that enough people are purchasing that carbon credit to make it neutral and then negative. And so the hard thing I have a hard time figuring out is economically why, if I'm an actor, I'm either going to have an incentive to externalize harm, or it just feels like my impact is so negligible that I just won't even bother to really think about it. And so engineering that buy pressure for those assets on their carbon ledger is something I have a big question about. I mean, is it like basically governments that are going to be buying these carbon ledgers and using tax dollars to do it, or is there another way to internalize what would normally be externalized by default?
Yeah. I think there's a list of hypotheses as to how we're going to do it, and we should push as hard as we can on every single one of those hypotheses, right? So, going sort of micro to macro, right? You have individuals that are starting to care more, and they can do some to reduce their impacts. And the more that we can allow them to understand what those impacts are in like granular verifiable detail, and also to prevent them from buying snake oil, right? I mean, not prevent them, but like allow them to see what they're actually buying. And if you're buying some offset or trying to do some mitigation, like make sure it's really good, right? So that's one level. And then at the company level, increasingly companies are responding to shareholder pressure in order to first just do reporting and then make those reports improve over time. So like set goals of being carbon neutral or being carbon negative, and aiming to reduce their impacts and mitigate their impacts and have a positive effect on the planet. So that's another thing that could be done. Clearly, like state and local governments, in my view, do have a role, and like they should do whatever is politically possible to keep the planet from burning because we're running out of time. And then at the really large scale, right, you have things like the Global Carbon Reward Program, which Delton Chen is working on. if you read the book The Ministry for the Future, it's effectively, it's by Kim Stanley Robinson. It's sort of a near-term sci-fi book about um, how crypto can help fix the climate crisis, right? So effectively, they create this global carbon coin, and it is backed by governments using monetary policy. So central banks set a price floor under this coin, and then anyone who can verifiably reduce the amount of carbon in the atmosphere can record that. It goes into the global carbon ledger, and that gets and they get rewarded from that because there's this price floor. So that if you read if you do a close read of the Ministry for the Future, that whole scheme is based on the Chen paper, which is Dr. Chen is a real guy. He is working on doing precisely this, and we should help him do that. So that's sort of a spectrum, right, from like the really micro to the really macro, and everyone should try to help out.
The Opera crypto browser is the world's first web browser built for the crypto community. With Web3 support and a non-custodial wallet, Opera lets you access DeFi apps quickly and easily. The Opera wallet has buy, sell, and swap features, and of course lets you view your beautiful NFTs, but the browser still lets you use any crypto wallet extension you prefer, giving you the choice and flexibility for the Web3 world. Opera lets you view and manage all of your assets across all the blockchains all at once, and offers seamless multi-chain support between Ethereum, Bitcoin, Polygon, Binance Chain, and other EVMs and Layer 2s. But Opera goes even deeper than that. Opera has a built-in homepage for crypto natives with the Opera Crypto Corner, with price charts, news feeds, NFT updates to make sure you are always on top of your game. And it even has Discord and Telegram integrated natively into the browser. That's crazy. Opera is truly building the battle station for the crypto world. Check out Opera both on mobile with Android and iOS apps, and on desktop too. COINSHIFT is a leading treasury management and infrastructure platform for DAOs and crypto businesses who need to manage their treasury operations. Every crypto org needs to manage their treasury, and COINSHIFT offers a simple, flexible, and efficient multi-chain treasury management platform built on top of the extremely secure Gnosis Safe. With COINSHIFT, your organization can go from primitive single-chain treasuries to expressive, flexible, multi-chain features such as global user management, global contracts, proposal management, and many other features that can be shared across an entire organization. COINSHIFT layers on powerful treasury management tools on top of the proven security of Gnosis Safe, allowing users to save time and reduce operational burdens and gas costs. COINSHIFT even has data tools like account reporting across the 7 chains on which it operates. Used by industry powerhouses such as Uniswap Grants, Balancer, Consensus, and Messari, COINSHIFT is speeding up the coordination and efficiency of the organizations that use it. In DeFi, you have to keep up with the frontier, and COINSHIFT makes that easy. So sign up at coinshift.xyz/bankless.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, we're starting to do a lot of research on decentralized identity in my ecosystem, and the whole idea is that if Web3 is a dark forest and you have this adversarial mindset because you can't see your counterparty, web identity can be this light that shows you who your counterparty is. And I'm wondering if and how identity fits in. Like, basically there could be people who care so much about environmentalism that they will give better deals to people who offset their carbon emissions or are otherwise not externalizing harm. And so I'm wondering, as we go from this micro to macro scale, how we can create that incentive for more people to not want to externalize carbon. It feels like identity fits in there a little bit. I don't know if you have anything to add with that.
Yeah, totally. And I love that image, right, of identity as this light that you shine on someone that you're interacting with in this dark forest. I think for me, identity interacts with zero knowledge in a way that is really crucial for this global carbon ledger to work. And the issue there is that if you are a company or a project, maybe you are completely working out in the open, and that's great, and everything you do is publicly verifiable. But we now have the ability, right, to build structures on this spectrum from completely open and completely deterministic and algorithmic all the way to sort of existing companies, which are pretty closed. And different projects are going to want to give other people a different degree of visibility into their books, right? So like a traditional closed company is not going to want to show every single person it does business with its full carbon accounting ledger, right? Because often things like energy use are very closely tied to their margins, and they want to maintain their trade secrets. They want to maintain secrets, any sort of like business information that's confidential. And so with zero knowledge, what we need to do, and people are starting to build it, and we're working on this too, is build a system in which you can allow the company or project internally to make this whole automatic model, right? How do my carbon inputs, things like fuel, things like electricity, things like the carbon intensity of what I buy, how do those map to outputs? So the products that I'm then letting my customers know how carbon intensive they are. And how can I make that model in a way that is really high quality and passes that information along in a way that's automatic, right? So we can move this data through value chains in minutes, not in months. And then when I tell a customer what the carbon intensity of their products are, how can I prove that what I'm telling them agrees with what I'm telling everyone else without actually showing them the entire contents of this model, right? And so, in order to scale this, um, beyond Web3, but even within Web3, right? Because not everyone is going to want everyone else to know exactly what the details inside of their project are, right? Which is fine, right? We want to allow people to keep certain types of information private, but we don't want people lying about what their carbon intensity is, or like stashing it into fake offsets or something. So I think that's so if you imagine the system uses um, that uses decentralized identity and some amount of auditing, but then zero knowledge at sort of the interfaces of a project, like I think that's really where we have to go, to make this type of thing really in practice scalable.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Is like the privacy aligned with the digital identity is an important part of that. But just I think that there should be a social norm where you're not just looking at the immediate. Well, then maybe one could build a protocol where you're not just looking at the immediate attributes of your counterparty to build a transaction with them. Like, if I'm doing an under collateralized loan, I want to know how often this party pays back their loans. And that's a first order thing. But how can we build a protocol in which I can say, oh, okay, they're actually a good actor and they're not externalizing harm as like a secondary part of that identification protocol? So I don't know. I'm rabbit holing on this. I don't need to take the conversation too far in an identity direction, but it felt like it was sort of pertinent to our conversation here.
Yeah, totally. And that's no, I think that's really relevant, right, to a lot of the governance questions around like how do you actually build this in practice, right, and make sure it's really high quality and like higher quality than the existing system. Um, Another kind of version of that where identity I think becomes really important is, say someone has an idea for really high quality carbon offsets and they want to match those with some customer who wants to offset their emissions, right? So the customer wants to make a really high quality claim, and then the person selling offsets wants to make a really high quality, um, wants to like have a really high quality product that is like recognized in the marketplace as such. So something you could do is um, run something like a bidding process where a bunch of people apply to have their offsets be used to match to this claim, and then you could have a public process in which different offsets are like ranked on different attributes. And then I think where identity comes into this is like, okay, that round of bidding finishes and you match these offsets to this claim, everything's great. But then have those projects maintain an identity as they go on to the next round, right? So it's like maybe you can see the history of like the development of this process, and maybe there was some weakness in like the verifiability of carbon sequestration in the first round, and maybe that project fixed it in the next round, right? So it's like see this like persistent history of the progress that's being made like technologically in sequestering carbon, and um, allow those sorts of attributes to follow actors around. So it's not just one claim one time. It's how do we actually take the research process of pulling carbon out of the atmosphere, or reducing carbon intensity of certain processes, and how do we actually build a governance process around that so we're incentivizing it properly and allowing projects to follow sort of the funding funnel, right? Going from smaller scale, more research oriented applications or funding opportunities to ones in which they really scale. And I think that type of coordination process in which we're not just tracking carbon and applying sort of a financial model to it, but we're really playing an active role in the knowledge generation that goes into creating new types of solutions and shepherding them along, I think has the potential to be really powerful.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's beautiful, and I really think that there's this perception that the Internet of Money and blockchains are just about finance, which is only one of the 8 forms of capital, right? There's spiritual capital, social capital, material living capital, intellectual capital. I'm forgetting the other 2 or 3, but creating a ledger that creates positive externalities on all of those vectors, I think is really very powerful at scale if we can coordinate together.
Right. And I think it goes back right to that recursion, right? You can use data to manage data, but you can use data to manage all sorts of other things if you can measure them. Um, there's this planetary boundaries framework, which I think a lot about, which is these, I believe, 9 different categories of variable that scientists can measure about the biosphere. And the amount of carbon in the atmosphere, you know, it's one of those variables, right? So they're all useful for assessing the sustainability of the planet for living creatures, including human civilization. One of the things that you can measure in order to figure out whether we are sustainable in the long term is CO2 concentration. And that's in this unstable zone. But other variables that you can measure are things like extinction of species and reduction in biodiversity. And that is in the red zone, right? Like if climate change is in the yellow zone, so like we're sort of verging on this being really unstable, biodiversity is collapsing, right, at this like completely unsustainable rate. Other things are nitrogen and phosphorus flows, which come largely from farming. Those are also like variables that we can measure that are in the red zone. And so I think that, like you're saying, right, to the extent that we can broaden our scope, where a lot of these tools were initially developed to manage financial capital, but something I think a lot about is how can we bring that degree of verifiability that we associate with something like an account balance and bring that to something like a attestation about your effect on one of these planetary boundary variables, right? Like how can we really like take that same degree of verifiability and apply it to these sustainability questions? And because we've already developed these tools and they work really, really well in finance, right? We should be able to expand to that scope and work really hard, right, on building sort of, as you point out, like non-skeuomorphic tools that are going to allow us to manage natural resources in a way that is far more robust and scalable than we've developed so far.
So, okay, so I'm envisioning what this looks like at scale, and to me it seems like the tracking of externalities not only on the carbon vector but other living material vectors like biodiversity. Maybe there's other living. Sorry, you said that there's multiple places where there's planetary boundaries that are being violated or might be violated that need to be tracked. So an economy of impact certificates that sort of track the positive externalities and create markets that can bring those planetary boundaries back into balance. And like, to me, that's kind of what I'm hearing. Is that what it looks like at scale? Take me 10 years into the future, say Filecoin Green is maximally successful. We're successful in building impact certificates for the world. What does this look like in the year 2033, 2032?
Yeah, I think what that looks like is not just within Web3, but in the economy as a whole. We have really robust reporting processes that allow you to know, no matter who you are at what position in the value chain, what are my effects on all of these planetary boundaries, right? What are my effects on land use for doing this? What are my effects on freshwater use? What are my effects on, biodiversity or phosphorus flows or something? And allow you to see, if I decide A versus decide B, what are those effects going to be? And then allow you to verify those effects at the end of the day. And then that's part of it, right? Is like those reporting pieces And then the next piece is connecting that to incentives so that we really have this scalable system where we're driving all of those variables, through impact certificates and sort of variations of impact certificates, driving all those variables into a more sustainable zone, like the sustainable zone specifically, like take all those variables and like there is a level set for each of them in the planetary boundaries framework, drive them toward that green sustainable zone. And then the third piece of it, I think, is having that be integrated with ongoing systems to continue to research what those boundaries should look like and continue to research what those impacts are and continue to empower people who are closest to those impacts in order to have an outsized effect in making those decisions. Right. So there's so at the global scale, right, there's the carbon ledger is a good way to look at this. There's the incentive structures at the corporate level or the network level that allow you to drive that below zero. Then there's the scientists, right, who are going to have to be incentivized in order to keep on trying to understand, right? Last year, we thought this planetary boundary was at this level. Actually, we think it should be at this level, right? Last year, we thought that the amount of carbon sequestration in the soil due to performing this particular type of regenerative farming technique was this. Now we have a better way of measuring it, and we think it's this, right? Or last year, we thought that this co-benefit, right, to this community in the Amazon that's protecting this forest worked this way. Actually, like we're working with them and they're telling us it works this other way. So we're going to course correct and we're going to set up these incentives to work better for people on the ground. Another thing I think about a lot is this book called Seen Like a State by James C. Scott, which is all about how when you take a system in a very centralized way and you imagine how that system should work and then you impose it on the real world, you're always going to miss things. And those things can come back and really sort of doom your project. So an example of that is scientific farming. When it was initially introduced in Germany in the late 19th century, they knew certain things about forests. They knew the land covered by a forest. They knew the amount of timber that they could extract from this forest, and they could walk around and see like what type of trees there were. But so they built a system using only those variables, right? They said, okay, we're going to manage this forest in order to provide the most timber and the most predictable supply of timber per acre as we can. And so they said, okay, we're going to take this natural forest, we're going to cut down that forest, we're going to plant the type of tree that gives us the most timber in these like neatly ordered rows. And this monoculture is going to be super optimized, right? And so the first generation that worked really well, and the next generation, the trees got kind of sick. And the third generation, their timber yield was super low, right? And so that is what happens when you take, you develop one model to rule them all and say, this is how we're going to manage the system, but you're not in touch with people on the ground. You're not in touch with a scientific community that can continue to study that over time and improve your system. You just like impose this version of the world on the world, and you're going to miss some variables no matter what you do, even if you try to do a really good job. So the only way to build this in a way that's actually going to work is build continuous improvement into that whole system, right? Which I think is a huge part of what we're aiming to do. If we're successful, years down the line, right? It's going to be because we succeeded at building that governance structure, not just the incentive structure and not just the measurement structure.
Yeah, beautiful. I think it feels like it all boils down to just building the coordination in which we can track these externalities in an incredibly neutral way and at scale, and then bootstrapping the economies of more certificates being created and being consumed and people caring about it at the social layer. And then it can just kind of snowballs from there. And it makes me quite optimistic, and I can't wait to see that snowball start to be built. So anything else to say about that? Anything I didn't ask you about this vision that you want to say?
Yeah, I think another aspect to it and another sort of avenue, right, into why we need Web3 native tools in order to build the global carbon ledger and the global ledger for other planetary boundaries in a way that really scales and really works is that in the economy before Web3, we had fiat money and we had these different computational processes that are layered on top of fiat money, right? So I was talking about in carbon ledgers, the way they do them now, they basically send a bunch of Excel spreadsheets by email between all these different people involved, right? And ultimately, fiat money is pretty dumb, right? It knows how to, like, if you think of it as a computational substrate, it knows how to add and it knows how to subtract, and you can set up these mechanisms that do other things like provide you yield, but it's not like a Turing complete computational substrate that's going to allow you to model externalities, right? And so the result of that is you have to set up this other data layer on top of it in these Excel sheets that allows you to try to like take transactions, right? And like maybe you set up the incentives right initially, maybe you didn't, but try to like do that accounting afterwards, like after the fact, right? And by using computable money, we can actually build that data layer into the transactions themselves, right? And so I think there's a huge amount of potential, right, in approaching all of this using the tools that we're used to in Web3, where we can really build something that is a difference in kind from the sorts of computational structures where people were trying to use fiat money to like kind of, build incentives, but then because fiat money is a computationally insufficient substrate for modeling environmental externalities, right? You can't take a forest and all of the like biodiversity benefits of a forest and like easily price them in a way that's visible to the market. We can actually start to like build these systems in a way where the incentives can actually work and improve over time in a way that you fundamentally can't otherwise.
So the computer scientist in me finds that compelling, that we need a Turing complete substrate that can track all of the positive complexities of doing this. But like what layer of abstraction is above that? Are we talking about local community currencies that track carbon? Like, so the problem with the US dollar and with Bitcoin is that it kind of takes everything and tries to put it in a US dollar shaped container. And if you have like a local currency system that's built around local values, I'm using local both in the geographic sense but like in the value system sense, you can kind of, are we talking about a local community currency for tracking carbon that has an exchange rate with US dollars and more global currencies? But like, what's the layer of abstraction on top of the Turing complete layer that you think is really powerful?
Yeah, I think we have to I think we have to try a bunch of things and see what
Mm.
works, right? And I think part of that is building those models directly into different systems, right? And so things like some projects like Gainforest or like the Open Forest Protocol are doing, in which and Regen Network, in which you are actually taking data about the health of an ecosystem and tying that in different ways for different projects to either different NFTs or different like tokenized carbon offsets or other instruments, right? And so that is a system in which you have an existing model and you send people out to measure, and then the data that they collect becomes part of your transaction, right? Then I think another level that we need to think a lot about is, say you do have a framework for a global carbon ledger, how do you decide who decides? And how do you, and credible neutrality is part of that, and also bringing the right types of expertise to make the right decisions in is a big part of that, right? And so um, part of it is, part of the answer to your question is you actually build models that are better than models that we could build with just fiat currency. So things like you send people out to measure trees, or you use satellite images to make sure to find what the tree cover is. And then the other piece is then how do you connect that to these governance systems that both tie break using properly designed incentive structures and expertise, and are set up to allow continuous improvement over time as our state of knowledge of those systems improves.
Got it. So it seems like there's quite a diverse set of projects slash ideas that are sort of in this design space, and creating a selling point for them and supporting them, as well as trying to lead them is part of that. And actually, that's a really great segue into the next thing that I wanted to talk about with you, which is you and I were just in Paris for ETHCC and for Sustainable Blockchain Summit. And one of the ways in which I feel a great kinship with Protocol Labs and Filecoin is that we're both kind of creating these social shelling points where people who care about positive externalities, crypto being good for the world, can come together, meet each other, figure out how to exchange capital and talent with each other, and sort of build a movement of more green crypto. And so, I think that you were actually the executive director or the main host behind Sustainable Blockchain Summit. So, not a question, but just a thank you. Thank you for putting that together. I think it was a great experience for me, and it makes me really hopeful about Web3 in general. Do you have anything else to say about the social shelling point that you created or Sustainable Blockchain Summit? I just had such a good time, and I just want to make sure that we give you a lot of kudos for running that, and I hope that you run another one.
Yeah, and we're definitely planning to. Yeah, thank you for coming. It was awesome, and of course, thank you for all the work you do, right, with Gitcoin, with this podcast, right, in the book, and Shelling Point, the conference, and all of doing that type of work, right? Yeah, the Sustainable Blockchain Summit was a blast. We got many of the major projects in the space all together to talk about what's going well, what needs to be improved. Really cool announcements coming out from a ton of great projects. We're planning to run it again in Bogota, probably so around DevCon. And a date for that should be coming out soon, as well as a speaker forum. So we would love people who are working on projects in the space, or who are interested in this space to come. It should be a really great time.
That's great. I think that Gitcoin DAO is planning on running a Shelling Point also in Bogota, so we should make sure that we don't double program each other. but yeah, I think that that's great, and looking forward to coming to another one of those in Bogota.
Absolutely.
Is there anything I didn't ask that you want to say? I feel like y'all are doing so much good stuff, and I don't know, lead us. What are you excited about?
What I mean, there's so many different directions that all of this goes in, right? I think what I'm most excited about is the growth of the refi community over the past year. It feels like, it seems like, I think a lot of us have been in crypto for a lot longer than that, and have been sort of looking for these shelling points, where we can organize around taking crypto, which like you talk about, right, or like you've mentioned in the past few minutes. I think a lot of the social perception around blockchains and around NFTs and all this stuff is that it's bad for the environment for all sorts of different ways. And I think there's been this great sort of surge of people who are in the space and both want to reduce those environmental externalities, and also just use these amazing tools and primitives that we have to build systems that you just couldn't build in sort of the Web2 economy, and build ways of really regenerating the planet and scaling that, right? And I think, like, it really does feel like over the past year, and sort of accelerating over the past 6 months, there's been this just like huge surge in people who are dedicated to that project, and I'm really excited about that. I'm really thankful for that.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's beautiful to see this group of like-minded people sort of come together and talk about this vision of how Web3 can be good for the world, and manage those positive externalities. And I almost think of it, it makes me feel like Web3 is this way to program our values into our money, but it just kind of started off in this cypherpunk sovereignty, privacy orienting direction, and I agree with those value sets too, but there's a whole contingent that I think is just starting to grow, that's more solarpunk and cares about these things. And it feels less lonely, I'll say, to have to have hundreds of people coming to Shelling Point and to be working on this stuff together. So it's really beautiful, and I think that it's just great that people are actually building projects in this space. I can't wait to see who's going to be like the Uniswap of this space, and who's going to be the Yearn Finance of this part of the space. It just feels very abundant right now.
Yeah, 100%. There's so much to do, and there's so many amazing people that are just sort of piling into it right now. I'm really, I'm really excited about the next year and the next 10 years to really see where we can go.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, where can people find you and Filecoin Green online?
Yeah, so we're at Filecoin Green on Twitter. You can go to green.filecoin.io to learn about our grant programs, our events. We have a meetup every month. It's happening next Tuesday. We have $1 million grant round that's focused on DeFi projects right now. So please go to green.filecoin.io to check that out. If you're interested in the next Sustainable Blockchain Summit, you can go to sps.tech. I think that website is going to be updated pretty soon with details on the DevCon SBS. Yeah, we announce most things through those channels. There's a sign up. There's a mailing list you can also sign up for on green.filecoin.io if you want more information. And if you want to really join our community, you can join the Filecoin Slack and go to the #PhilGreen channel. And we will see you there.
Great. Beautiful. Well, thanks so much for being on the pod. Thank you for your good work on Filecoin Green, GreenPilled. It feels like there's some really great stuff happening here, and looking forward to building this movement with y'all.
Me too. Thanks for having me on.